All right, so here's these finches, and this is a wonderful example of Darwin's idea of natural selections. The finches on the islands resembled the mainland finch from South America. However, they were all a little different. And they're different depending on which island. And what he found was a link between the available food source and the type of finch and the beak that was found on the finch, okay? So the finches had different types of beaks that were adapted to their food, the type of food that they gathered. So here we have the different ones, and Darwin found a total of 13 finch varieties, which all came from the same ancestor, and basically their beaks were adapted to what they needed to do. If they had to get into fruits and crack it, they had more of a parrot-like beak. If they needed to do something like this guy, this cactus ground, he had a large beak for crushing. These guys used... For insects, they needed to kind of funnel in, so they're long beaks that could funnel into the spines of the cactus and get insects. This is a ground finch, so it has a very big beak that's more like a crushing beak to crush the seeds. The tortoises we also saw varied depending on what island they were from and the environment that was on the island. And you can see how the shapes of their necks, the length of their legs, all differed. So his conclusion was that individuals who inherit characteristics that are most fit for their environment are likely to leave more offspring than the less fit individuals, okay? So it's super simple. If you have an individual that is better adapted to the environment that it's in, it's going to be able to get more food, it's going to thrive, produce more offspring, and then that offspring will become more prevalent. You're going to do a little worksheet with a case study kind of thing with the pocket mice and how the environment changes and then how they change. And the color of their fur changes based on what the environment is. Okay, so this idea of natural selection is, I'm sorry, I just skipped one, but basically, yeah, I think I did. I'm sorry. So we call this idea that the individual that is more fit for the environment, that it leaves more offspring, we call it natural selection. That's what he said. Okay, so the summary of natural selection is the idea that species are going to produce more, it's going to be an overproduction, okay? You have a variation. We're all a little different. If you look around the room and you look at the differences in your classmates or even the differences within your family, we're all a little different, okay? Think about noses. Everybody has different nose shapes, right? What if a certain nose shape gave you an advantage? Okay, there's a lot of variety. Maybe the medium nose shape was perfect. Maybe a really tiny nose shape is better to get your food source or something. Okay, so selection. Some individuals can survive longer. The variation allows them to survive longer and reproduce more, and then that variation becomes an adaptation. We say it's an adaptation because the adaptation is an individual that can survive and reproduce, and it becomes more common in the population. Okay, so here's the main ideas. Basically, you have an overproduction. All species produce more than can survive. You have a variation. The individuals are different, okay? For instance, the pocket mouse. You have mice that are black. You have mice that are brown. You have mice that are white. This is a pocket mouse that's in the desert, right? So all of those different variations, one might get selected for by the environment. If the desert is a white environment, it's a very light sand environment, then the lighter mice are going to survive because they're not going to stick out for a predator, right? If a hawk's flying overhead and there's a black mouse on white sand, he's going to be able to get that mouse. He's going to be able to see the black mouse, okay? That's the idea of why we don't have, there's in bear world, you have the albino deer, right? Or the albino elk. The reason we don't have albino elk running around in the wild is because they're selected against. They're easy for the wolves and the bears. They're very easy for predators to see them. An adaptation. So an adaptation is that the traits of individuals that survive. So basically a variation doesn't become an adaptation unless that variation gives the individual an advantage. Oop, Hobby put his tail in there. And when it has an advantage and they can reproduce more, it becomes an adaptation. Okay? So for the pocket mouse, you have 3 different colors, let's say. I'm not sure that's correct. Well, the white adaptation, if the desert has a white background, is going to be, or the white variation is going to give it an advantage. So the white color is an adaptation. If suddenly the ground turned darker, then the white would no longer, that variation would no longer be an advantage, and it would be no longer it would give it a disadvantage, and maybe the darker colored mouse would have that adaptation. Okay. So basically this overproduction makes it so that more individuals, there's more individuals than can survive. So we have to do something about that. And there's a struggle for existence. And only a fraction of the offspring are going to actually make it to each generation. And that's the reason, like humans, there are some people and theories, and then there's other people that will disagree, that humans aren't really evolving at the rate that other animals are anymore, because even we make sure that there's food for everyone. We try not to make it where there's a definite effort to make sure that everyone has food. And that's not always the case, but it's not quite like the wild animals, like a tiger that has to look for its food, and there's more than are needed, or a prey that the weakest will get selected against, okay? So only a fraction of the offspring survive for each generation, and we call that survival of the fittest. Okay, so here's Darwin's observations, kind of summarized. No 2 individuals are exactly alike. This variation between the individuals is inherited, and that ability to inherit those give some individuals characteristics that make them more fit for their environment, and they are more likely to leave more offspring than the less fit. So this shows you a bug thing, and if you look, the green bugs kind of stick out, and it's always hard when you're dealing with a computer screen, but the green bugs stick out more. So the predator can see them more. So we would say the variation of the green gene it is selected against. The predators can see it. The variation of the brown gene is an advantage or an adaptation. So you're going to have an increase in the brown colored beetles if the background of the bark is brown. Okay, so here we are, survival of the fittest. Fitness is the ability of an individual to survive and reproduce. An adaptation is an inherited characteristic that increases the organism's chance for survival. Okay? So, when we say survival of the fittest, it's not who's the most fit in terms of a fitness class, it's who can survive and reproduce the most. And it becomes an adaptation if that if that characteristic gives it an advantage for survival. Okay, so here's an example of the giraffe's neck growing taller. Basically, the giraffes, they didn't get taller necks by coincidence, but the taller neck allowed the giraffe to get more food than the short neck. So it's able to reproduce more, it's healthier. So the long necks became more common, and it's actually pretty cool if you look at different areas of giraffes, and there's several different species of giraffes, their necks it's not always the longest, it's the one that reaches the food source. Because if a giraffe had too long of a neck, It's not as easy to, if it's longer, way too long and way over the trees, that's not an advantage either. So the necks were where they were tall enough to get to the top of the branches, but, and whatever the average size of the tree would be the size of the neck. And this is a great example of adaptation. So adaptations can be physical, such as speed, camouflage, claws, quills, behavioral. Herds or packs are examples of adaptations. And this idea of survival of the fittest, this is the central process in evolution. Individuals, and again, this is not fitness like a fitness class, but individuals with a low fitness will not survive. The ones that don't have the adaptation that allow them to thrive in the environment. They will either die or they're going to just produce less offspring. So it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. That is a famous quote from Charles Darwin. And as great quote during the COVID times, because those of you that have been able to adapt and make the most of the online learning, you have proven that you are adaptable and you can be successful in any type of learning environment. So I'm going to leave you with that. Have a fabulous day.